Hello, Earthlings, and welcome along to yet another vegan time tunnel. So I think we've got about 30 in the archives now. I should know really, but we've got that. So we've moved on a little bit to doing the interviews. So this is what this one is. So hi, Jennifer. First in, that's good. So this is going to be the part 2 of the Mark Humanity interview where we're talking about direct action in Ireland. So that's going to be pretty good. Now, in terms of the routine, as we know, if you're tuning in on anything other than my YouTube channel, then you're best to transfer there if you want to be involved in the chat, because that's usually where the main chat is. And in terms of commenting, and you can do that on Facebook as well, because I still see that, then we don't make you pay to have your comments put on the screen. So that's just one little bit there that's pretty important. So I think that's about it in terms of me rambling on. We had an interesting 12 hours on World Vegan Day. So this is World Vegan Month Day 2 now. So our 12-hour show yesterday, well, I'd planned 10 hours and we ended up doing 12 hours and 9 minutes it was, which was then promptly taken down because we'd done a watch along featuring Carnage, the Simon Amstel film. So unfortunately that got taken down by the BBC, which meant that all the 12 hours have been taken down. I do have a recording, so I'll be able to issue clips minus the Carnage, of course. Okay, speaking of Carnage, it's time for Mark. Welcome back, Mark. That was a bit mean of me, wasn't it?
It was quite a dramatic introduction. Still, will I go with that? Yeah, good. There is quite a bit of carnage ahead, actually. So.
Oh yeah. I suppose it's more relevant to this week than it was to last week. So, have you had a good week generally yourself?
Yes, it's been warming up here. The El Niño weather thing is beginning to kick in, and it's suddenly beginning to turn very, very warm and dry up here, down here. Yeah.
How can it be dry in a rainforest?
It can be. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know.
Actually, it's funny, really, because rainforests you kind of associate with being so dense that maybe, does the water actually get to the bottom, or does it have to?
It does. Yeah, no. The thing about here is that the Waitakere Ranges, which is where I am, were completely devastated by loggers about a century ago. Up until about a century ago, when they suddenly realized that they had. They suddenly noticed they had no trees left hardly. So there was a massive rewilding project done. So it's sort of first and second generation growth here. So most trees are still quite young, so therefore quite small. So no, it's quite a young forest. So the rain gets right down. It's really lush. But
so it's kind of what's the other word for it? Mature, I suppose. So it's not mature yet.
Yes,
so
that's right.
How long do you reckon that'll take?
Another few hundred years, I would say.
Oh, 100 years. Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, it's a centuries long project. Yeah.
All right. Well, when it happens, send me a text and I'll have a look.
I'll send you some photographs. Yeah.
Okay. So we're coming into the vegan meaty part of your presentation, in the sense that this is the real kind of direct action part, isn't it?
Yeah. This is the 1980s and onwards. Yeah.
Yeah. So whenever you're ready, you're quite happy to go. I'm quite happy to let you go.
Okay, we can dive in now. I'll just do a brief summary of the last interview. Sort of covered the area really from largely from 1822 till about the late 1970s, I would say. And
right. So that's our part 1. So if
that's part 1. Yeah, and that covers the initial legal efforts by the likes of Trigger Martin to push through the Cruelty to Cattle Act in 1822, and from there on there was a gradual extension of the interpretation of sentient life and wanton cruelty.
I remember you talking about Trigger Martin and his private prison, and in fact, it must have made an impression, because Dennis Nealis from Sentient Rights Ireland posted that on on Facebook. Whoa, look at this! The first animal abuse
Okay.
in prison. You know, yeah. So,
Right. I must have a look, because when I went to look on Google Maps, it was really vague, and I couldn't really see any details. So yeah, that should be it should be a monument, really. There should be a plaque saying that there. I don't know if there is or not, but it is a very significant place, really.
yeah. Well, I'm going to try and track down that plaque you mentioned on
Henry Street, on 21 Henry Street. Yeah, it's on the side of the wall there by what is now maybe a health food store, like pills and all that sort of health food store.
Yeah, that kind of one. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So all that, folks, was part one, and this then from now on is part two.
This is part two. So from here on in, we're covering sort of the 1980s onwards, and this area is going to cover the rise of the Animal Liberation Front. So if could you call up the slides there, Roger? Here we go. Yeah, that's it. So, okay. So first of all, to explain where I sourced all the information from, it's all publicly available information from across a range of media. So a lot of the mainstream media going right back via the Irish newspaper archives, which is where I got a lot of the information for episode 1 as well. But I also triangulated the information with the animal rights movement's publications of the time as well. So you had the likes of the Animal Liberation Front supporters group Diary of Actions, whose editors kept getting busted and imprisoned generally for incitement and things like that. So there was a rolling editorial team there involved, and that publicized actions by the ALF around the world, including Ireland. And then there was, of course, Howl, which is the quarterly magazine of the Hunt Saboteurs Association, which is still in print. It's been in print since 1973, and they have an archive on the Hunt Saboteurs Association website as well. So I read through basically every issue of Howl, of the Diary of Actions from the ALF supporters group, of every other associated sort of militant or quasi-militant animal rights group, and anything to do with animal rights or the ALF or the Hunt Saboteurs in any Irish newspaper ever in print. And also
a couple of points on that, Mark. It's quite interesting because I've always not really liked the title Howl for the HSA thing, because it stands for Hounds Off Our Wildlife, doesn't it? And I don't like the idea. I mean, from an animal rights point of view, the free living beings, they belong to themselves. So the idea of it being ours is a problem.
It sort of stems back from the very embryonic beginnings of the animal liberation, animal rights movement back in this. So it's the early 1970s. So and I think it's sort of a bit of a hangover from that. I didn't know that it stood for Hands Off for Wildlife until about 10 years ago, and I've been involved in Hunt Saboteurs for years and years.
Okay.
I'd always neglected to read the little
and then the second point, you said that the editors of the ALFSG were kind of under scrutiny. But then again, if you look at the screen, devastate to liberate. If you're going to,
I know they really pushed the envelope here. They were really, again, it was the early days of the movement. Here's a typical.
Do you know what their really famous front page was? Learn to Burn. You remember that one?
Learn to Burn. I think I've let me see. Here we see Butcher's Hippo. It really probably glorified the direct action and striking back and so on. It was a very provocative, very insightful magazine. There is a similar sort of Diary of Actions website now called Unoffensive Animal, and it's a lot less provocative, shall we say. It's more sort of
less incendiary,
less insightful. So I think they learned their lessons over the years. But we can see here the Diary of Actions on the left here was probably a 4 or 5 or 6 page bulletin produced every sort of 3-4 months, listing hundreds of actions from all around the world. It was quite in the 80s and 90s. The ALF was at its zenith, and it really shows in the tone of the publications and the frequency and the amount of actions going on. So let's go back a bit here. I also sourced it from Sabotage, which is the information from Sabotage, which is a Hunt Saboteurs Association book that they released for their 50th anniversary some years back. From Dusk Till Dawn, which is Keith Mann's book. He was banged up for 14 years, I think, for arson or attempted arson.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And he spent a lot of that time either on the run or writing this book From Dusk Till Dawn, which is a huge, big tome, and it goes into the history of the ALF, principally in the UK. So I got a lot of information from that. And then, of course, the last two here, Outfoxed Again and Outfoxed by Mike Huskisson, who infiltrated the various hunters groups during the 70s and 80s, posing as a hunter and getting information on film and as witness to what they were really up to. So this is where I source my information. It's all publicly available, and everything I list here is the stuff that made it to the news. So it's the least of what has happened. It may represent the most of what has happened, but it isn't all of what has happened. A lot of really small scale actions, I would imagine, never made it to any media. So the stuff I could find in newspapers or in animal rights magazines, anything and everything I could find, I listed. So here we have, this is on the front page of one of the Evening Herald, I think. So again, during there was a rise during the 80s and 90s of the animal liberation fronts in the UK, and in Ireland, they sort of rose to prominence during the early mid 1980s. And there was a few principal sort of areas of operation, and one of them was the coursing debate, where they would go in and put glass, or threaten to put glass, shards of glass, on a field that was to be used the following day for a coursing event, and that would slow the proceedings down, or would intimidate the farmer that owned that field out of being involved in coursing or whatever. Spiking products, or pretending to have spiked products, was a thing that carried over from the Mars bar hoax in the UK, which was really successful in terms of the damage caused. Food poisoning hoax. There was a few food poisoning hoax. Lots of smashing of butchers' windows seemed to be a huge thing during the 80s and 90s. It was going on all over the place. Dublin also quite recently saw the first open lobster rescue from a Chinese shop in the city centre, and the lobsters were brought to the sea, I believe.
Just down the road from Cornucopia, that
was it. Okay, right. So you can see here, most of these, if not all of these, are headlines from various Irish media, mainstream media, of stuff the ALF are doing. Gardaí act to break terror squad. So they were causing such a ruckus around them that the police set up their own special squad, the same as they did in the UK with Arnie. It never had a name like that. It was just the Animal Liberation Squad or something like that. I don't think they arrested anyone at all. This particular Garda squad. There was some arrests up in the north of Ireland of some ALF activists who served a bit of time for it. But down in the south, there's only a record of 2 people being arrested in Waterford and being fined £30 each at the time. So if we just go back into the origins of the ALF here, and that's going to go back to, it's going to go over to the United Kingdom, to this chap in the middle here, who Roger might recognize.
No, we needed a content warning for that.
Yeah. This is Ronnie Lee, co-founder, principal founder, I would say, of the Animal Liberation Front, formerly the Band of Mercy. So the whole thing came out of the Hunt Saboteurs Association. The small groups of militants were meeting in groups like the Hunt Saboteurs and deciding to take things to a new level and vandalize empty vehicles owned by hunts as they were off hunting on quiet country lanes. They'd leave the air out of the tires, they'd smash the windscreen and stuff like this. And that expanded to taking on the vivisection industry. And on the left here, you see a partially burnt boat from the Wash. It was destined to be used on a seal hunt, and that was put out of action. And the seal hunt was abandoned from then on. And that was a very early Band of Mercy action with immediate success. It closed down that seal hunt that had been operating for years. And on the right here, we see a note left by the Band of Mercy claiming responsibility for an arson attack on a building site of an animal lab.
Now, Ronnie still can't write any better than that.
Yes, it's been done clearly with one of those stencil set things,
Yeah.
They're all the rage. So the significance of a note like this can't be underestimated. It's the first, or one of the first, declarations of war on the animal abuse industries, I suppose you could say. First of its kind. It heralds a new liberation movement, and clumsy as it's written, it's highly significant. It's the first of its kind. It's a real. I was really happy to come across that and to be able to include it. Of course, the very first bands of mercies were these guys here, who were groups of kids, usually between the ages of 5 and 15. They were huge in the United States, particularly. They were tied in with the Christian revivalist movement, the alcohol abstention movement, and also the animal welfare movement. And they'd go around singing songs about taking care of animals. Apparently, sometimes some of them used to damage hunters' guns. But that wasn't part of the formal Band of Mercy philosophy. They were sort of they would go around promoting the idea of being kind to animals by singing songs and by acting as exemplars. And they were absolutely huge in the United States at the turn of the 20th century. About 3% of all kids aged between 5 and 15 were members of Bands of Mercies, of chapters of Bands of Mercies. There was thousands of chapters around the US in particular, and it was big in the UK as well. So that gave the inspiration to Ronnie Lee and some of his cohorts at the time to set up their own Band of Mercy, and that developed into the Animal Liberation Front.
Going back to the Band of Mercy, Mark.
Yeah.
I know that Ronnie was inspired because they it was a time when that kind of like a little offshoot from the RSPCA was quite militant, but you're kind of suggesting it wasn't. I mean, so where did the militancy image come from?
There's a book that Ronnie has read that indicates the sabotage of hunters' property. I couldn't find any evidence of this. There's hardly anything written online about the Band of Mercy. There's maybe 4 or 5 paragraphs in total, and it only talks about their evangelizing, sort of singing and going around and propagandizing. But it didn't mention anything about sabotage there. But there is a book that I couldn't find anywhere online to read. But I know that Ronnie has some information on this indicating it. But I couldn't find my own proof of it, so I didn't want to emphasize it too much.
I showed Ronnie that picture once and asked him which one of those kids was him.
Is he the guy in the middle? The small guy in the middle?
Yeah. I think he said that himself, I think.
It's before he had glasses and all that. So then Ronnie and Cliff Goodman got caught as they were about to set fire to a laboratory and sentenced to a few years in prison, or 18 months or so. And when they got out, Cliff Goodman had enough and hung up his balaclava. Ronnie didn't, and doubled down and helped set up what became the Animal Liberation Front, who kicked off in the sort of mid to late 70s. And initially, a lot of the stuff was centered around rescuing animals from vivisection and adjacent industries. It evolved into arson attacks, the Mars bar poisoning hoax. They really upped the ante during the late 70s into the 80s. Where they were responsible actually for some of the largest fires seen in Britain since the Luftwaffe in World War II.
Yeah,
so
could you maybe for the audience, could you tell the story of the Dingles fire that you had in the last
Sure.
slide there?
The Dingles fire here it's representative of, during the mid to late 80s, there was a campaign against the fur trade. In the research I've done, it's probably one of the most effective animal rights campaigns probably of that time. And probably one of the reasons for that was because there was such a multitude of tactics. It was sort of, there was above and below ground tactics being used. There was groups like Lynx and Greenpeace and Sea Shepherd and so on, who were highlighting the cruelty of, say, the Canadian seal cull by going up there with cameras and are recording it and then getting it shown on the BBC, etc. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there was the likes of the Animal Liberation Front, who had developed these incendiary devices that would fit inside an empty packet of cigarettes, and they would be placed into the top floor of a department store that was selling fur somewhere in it. With timing devices, it was timed to go off sometime in the middle of the night, and the idea was that it would spit out some flame, start a small fire, produce a small amount of smoke, and trigger off the sprinkler systems that all these department stores had by law. But what happens, of course, if you do this and the sprinkler system isn't working or is turned off, then the fire spreads. And in a few cases, it wasn't the sprinkler system that turned on and created all the damage by water damage. It was fires that got out of control and burnt these places to the ground. And some of them were out of operation for years, and none of them resumed selling.
I've always argued, that in terms of dingles, the ALF were quite likely to have maybe saved human lives there, because if that fire had started in the daytime, not by the incendiaries, but just a fire, and the sprinklers weren't working, it would have been devastation.
That's right.
And just for this comment, yes, Elliot, we're actually live. So if you want to ask a question, Mark will answer it live for you, if that's what you're getting at.
And then with the Mars bar poisoning hoax, that was in 1984, I think, when the ALF claimed to have put alpha kill, a type of rat poison, commercially available rat poison at the time. They claimed that they had spiked random Mars bars around the country and placed them back onto the shelves of shops. They'd spiked them with rat poison in protest against funding for the owner of Mars were funding research into tooth decay on monkeys. Obviously, the best advice if you want to avoid tooth decay is to not eat things like Mars bars. But so it was seemed to be a very cynical move on their part to be doing this, obviously highly exploitative of the monkeys involved. So the ALF decided to go straight for the jugular, claimed they had poisoned random Mars bars all around the country, sent in an example of 2 poisoned Mars bars. Apparently, these were the only 2 that were actually poisoned. So when these were sent into the media or to the police, and they were analyzed, and there was poison found in them, and it scared the bejesus out of Mars and the government, and the media went ape on this. And obviously, it was all bad press, but it was press. And Mars withdrew their funding for the animal research. They didn't sell their sale of Mars bars slumped to 0, I think, for 10 days, and it took about 10 weeks for it to climb back to normal sales. They had to employ 1,000 people to remove every Mars bar from every shop in the UK. It took them about a week or something. I mean, it caused chaos. And
we were doing stalls in Liverpool at the time, and
how did the public react to that? Was there any?
Well, it was quite interesting because the Liverpudlians, the Scouse humour. Some guy came up and he goes, "You haven't got any Mars bars, have you, mate?" And I said, "No, sorry, we're right out of them." So they took it rather well, really. But
yeah, there was. So obviously, it's a very belligerent, maybe scary thing to claim to have done. They as I say, they admitted it was a hoax about a week later. Because it was so effective, there was copycat hoaxes of things like Sunsilk shampoo in Ireland and the UK, coordinated a few months later, I think. And there was a smattering more of food poisoning hoaxes around that time, following on from the Mars bar hoax in the UK and Ireland, sometimes nationwide, sometimes coordinated between Ireland and the UK.
Yeah, I think Lucasade was one, wasn't it, Mark? Lucasade?
There was the Lucasade one, that's right. There was Sunsilk, there was Lucasade, and there was a few other things that were poisoned along the way. Generally in protest against those particular companies like Wella.
Yeah, I didn't know there was any in Ireland at all until I saw.
There was a few in Ireland. Yeah, there was. Some group claimed they'd poisoned turkeys or something in the run up to Christmas, I think. And I got a little bit of media attention, a few paragraphs that I'd come across, but nothing on the on the scale of the Mars bar reaction. So an action like this obviously depends entirely on a willing, a gullible media to sort of spread your word.
It,
and
it was
to
the time
hype it
when
up.
Ronnie was really, really busy. The Mars bar thing, I mean, like you got the influencers talking about being on the media and everything, but like he was on just about every news show
Yeah,
every hour for
yeah.
a few days.
I remember seeing when
Debbie's
I was really
asking,
young.
how the heck did they find only 2 poisoned Mars bars? Because
They,
that's the
they,
only
they
two
were
that were.
they
Yeah,
were posted. The poison Mars, the only 2 Mars bars that had any poison in them were the ones that were posted to, I think it was the media, like the Times over in the UK or something like this, with letters attached saying this is an example of what we've done all around the country. But it wasn't. It was the hoax. It was just to
it was
get
a
the
hoax. Yeah.
media talking about it. It turned out so highly effective, but the media copped on and stopped. It seemed, and then stopped talking about it either at all or anywhere near as much, and with anywhere near as much sort of hype as the Mars bar event. So
I think what happened also is that some Mars bars they were kind of the packet was injected.
tampered with.
Yeah, so it
Yeah,
looked like
that's
that's right.
right.
So
That's right.
yeah,
Like the ceiling was pierced and stuff. The wrapping had been pierced as if they had
yeah,
been
that's
injected
it. Yeah.
or potentially injected with something. But yeah, so there was a whole lot of this going on to make it look real. And yeah, it was revealed to be the big hoax it was then. So during the 80s and 90s, particularly the 80s, the Animal Liberation Front in particular were going wild around the UK and were having some success over in Ireland. I would say that the whole thing really petered out from about 2010 onwards. There's been hardly any actions anywhere around the world. I mean, there's places like Mexico and Chile that seem to have fairly active groups there, but in the Western world, if you want to call it that, it's really died a slow death, really. Many reasons for that. One would be the ubiquity of CCTV and the increased surveillance just generally everywhere, better forensics from the police, arrests and some massively long sentences, particularly over in the UK with Keith Mann and the guy that died in hunger strike, Barry Horn, getting 18 years, I think. So that put a lot of people off, and massive state infiltration, of course, which only came to light relatively recently, led principally by this guy. These 2 photographs on the right here. This guy is the guy who Bob Lambert is his name, aka Bob Robinson, and he's the guy who literally wrote the manual, wrote the book on police undercover, the nefarious world, the really dark and dirty world of police, the special police squads that were going undercover into almost entirely left-wing groups from the 1960s onwards. Bob Lambert was one of the main players here. He managed to infiltrate a cell, an arson cell of the ALF, who were setting fire to department stores, the likes of Dingles that we were talking about. He managed to worm his way into a small ALF arson cell, and there's allegations including by an MP, by Caroline Lucas, that he actually planted an incendiary device in a Debenhams in, I think it might have been Luton, and the sprinkler system wasn't working and it burnt the store, or there was loads of water damage to the store. I'm not too sure, but either way, it was a successful operation that he took part in. The other 2 people who took part in it got 3 and 4 years each in prison. Bob Lambert here got promotion for doing the exact same thing. And he wrote this, the Tradecraft Manual. Their tagline is by any means necessary, and they meant it. These guys were going in, they were starting relationships with women, most of whom had very little or no involvement in any of the groups that they were spying on. They were just being used as a mask, essentially. And in at least 4 cases, they had kids with these people. They had children. I think in one case, one guy had 2 kids with one activist. And Bob Lambert set the pace for all this. On the extreme right here he is holding his son that he fathered with a woman, Jackie, who he betrayed and tricked into thinking her into thinking that he was a gardener and an activist. In fact, he was a cop. He was using her to gain access to other people who he wanted to spy on, basically. I think he was with her for 4 or 5 years. His son that he's holding in his arms here, and the mother of his son, both sued him a couple of years back for various things, and they both got about £500,000 each from the state for psychological damages and so on. So no one in the animal movement, I would say, knew how deep this penetration went. There was dozens of spies.
Well, here's a couple of questions for you, Mark, both from Deb. Is the ALF still pretty active in places like Sweden, Denmark, and Norway?
I think there's occasional actions to do with the fur farm, fox fur, particularly in places like that, but not that much. It's been sporadic in those places. Yeah, there was. I do recall seeing regular enough actions in the diary of actions from particularly Sweden during the 80s and 90s. But as with most other places in Europe, it's really dwindled since around the mid 2010s, about 2010 onwards. There's been a lot less there.
There's still some mink farm liberations in the United States, but it's the it's the most controversial of the ALF activities.
That's right. That's right.
So that's one. And then Deb says the police infiltrated fathered these kids.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. Yeah, they fathered these kids. It's awful. There's a really good book called Undercover by two Guardian journalists, and it's excellent. It really goes into detail. Some went native, some went crazy, some had kids. It's unbelievable. They make the East German Stasi look like peeping toms.
Yeah, wasn't their tactic to kind of get out of the relationship? Didn't they kind of fake some kind of trauma or mental breakdown?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The targeted woman would wake up one morning and there'd be a note on the breakfast table saying, "I couldn't take it anymore. I've had enough. I've gone to Spain for 6 months, or so I need to get some time out, or my uncle is sick and I've got to go back to Australia," or something like this. And all of a sudden they are gone, and that's it. It's their end of duty. They're told by their handlers, okay, you've got to terminate this relationship next week by any means necessary, and the usual format. They all followed a very, very similar format. I assume that's changed now because that format's publicly known. But the format was that they would turn up at an activist meeting. They would usually have a van and a clean license, which was very rare among activists those days. It
might have changed in terms of going things like online now. But if Deb, if you want to read about this, you can look at the Spy Cops website.
Podcast, and there's a podcast of Spy Cops as well.
Yeah. And see, one of the women who kind of outed herself to use a real name was Helen Steele. I used to know Helen from when she was in London Greenpeace.
Yeah.
And she was tricked, and she actually went look around the world looking for
she found them. Yeah, John Dines.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And so an interesting movement issue, actually, Mark, is that about 3 weeks ago, because Ronnie and I covered it a few days ago, one of the new kind of influencers thought that they'd uncovered a spy, maybe a corporate spy rather than a police spy.
Okay.
But they had no idea of this history.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. And it goes to show, if you don't know the history of the movement you're in, you're going to get a distorted image of it.
That's right. And it'll happen again. The same pitfalls will occur again. Do you know what John Dines is doing now, Roger?
No, I don't think so.
He's working in Australia for the Australian police, teaching the Indian police how to infiltrate left-wing groups in India. That's his job. Yeah.
So left-wing groups in India?
But there are actually, yeah. There's a movement there called the Naxalites, and I think they're after them. Yeah. So the guy has just moved around, and he's doing the same thing in the Southern Hemisphere now.
Yeah, one of the cops, I do know that one of the cops just cut his hair, had a shave, and he went back to his station, which is just around the corner from his victim. Yeah. And she didn't know because he looked so different and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about ruthless,
Yeah, yeah. Oh God, yeah. There was no mercy at all, really. I mean, that the cynicism, and the damage that they inflicted on these people. You know, it was awful, absolutely awful. No one would have guessed that the state were that interested in people like them or the movement generally back in the day. I think if someone had whispered in your ear, you know, that guy over there, the guy that's had a baby with so and so, he's actually a cop and all that, no one would have thought it plausible. But there it was, you know. So
Yeah, there was
unbelievable.
a couple of things that came up in the Sheffield trial, which was kind of like, oh, really? You know, but you could never be true because you know, you can never be sure about these things.
That's right.
That's the
Yeah,
problem. You know, they can just cast a bit of doubt, and then
yeah,
nobody kind of really knows really in the
that's
end.
right.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So moving on to coursing and its discontent. So coursing was the sort of touchstone really for the very beginnings of what you might call the proactive. I'm sort of afraid of using the word militant animal rights because militancy usually involves death and guns and stuff. There has been no similar group in the animal rights. The ALF cause economic damage and vandalize and so on and so forth, but they don't threaten people or they don't harm people. So they aren't really a militant group in that sense. But I'll use that word loosely in connection with the sort of the civil disobedience end of the animal rights movement, should we say. So it started off here in the north of Ireland with the Queen's University Belfast Anti-Blood Sport Society, and they stepped in. The previous, the spikiest group taking on coursing at the time was something called the Anti-Coursing League, and their methods were having silent vigils outside of coursing stadiums, just a few people sort of standing around a candle, basically, and that was deemed to be fairly ineffective. And these guys, these students came in, and they were taking inspiration from what they were seeing. This is the very early 80s. They were inspired by the suffragette movement, by the U.S. civil rights movements, the Martin Luther King style of civil disobedience, massive but passive, stuff like that. Here they are blockading the entrance to the Creebelly coursing festival, which was held at a greyhound racing track outside Belfast every year. So this was the start. This is the very first public showing of civil disobedience in the name of animal rights in Ireland that is in recorded history. And it got a lot of media attention because of its novelty. And it was repeated a number of times over the next sort of 18 months or so. And here we see an activist being carried off a field. Again, the idea was to disrupt and cause disorder and sabotage, and by doing blockades and sit-ins. So it was peaceful, but it was provocative and disruptive. Definitely.
One of the most dangerous things that people can do go up against the coursers because they're really violent.
These guys love violence, right? That's why they're into coursing. So I would say terrier men on fox hunts and coursers are probably two of the most vile and violent demographic people I've ever come across. Very, very quick with their fists, right? Here they are again. People are trying to break through lines in the RUC, obviously the Royal Ulster Constabulary at the time, now the PSNI, were par excellence at crowd control. This is the early 1980s in the north of Ireland, just outside Belfast. These guys were used to dealing with massive disruption in the cities with the civil war that was going on there. So nonetheless, the anti-blood sports guys were able to break through the lines of police and do sit-downs and get dragged off again. Again, this is the Creebelly Coursing Club, which was the epicenter of the beginning of the civil disobedience / militant animal rights movements in Ireland. It spread south, and a common tactic at the time, and I remember reading it about it a lot in the Evening Echo and the Cork Examiner as a kid, activists would claim they had or would actually spread brass tacks, sometimes painted green, this grass green color, and thrown all over the field that was designated as a coursing field for the following day or whatever. And this would mean that the farmers and the coursers would have to comb through the field and take all the glass or the tacks off the field before the coursing could begin. Obviously, it's quite a maybe an incongruous method of protecting wildlife, throwing broken glass around the field. But the point was that they were doing this in the knowledge that all the glass or attacks would have to be removed if the field was going to be viable for anything for the farmer or for the course.
Well, obviously they wouldn't care about the hares, but they would care about the hounds, wouldn't they?
Yeah. So
it's a bit of a stretch to say intimidating landowners, don't you think?
Pardon?
It's a bit of a stretch to say that was an intimidation of landowners. You would think. I mean, it's an inconvenience, isn't it? Really,
it's an inconvenience, and it slowed things down, and it made headlines. And there was a few people a few landowners did refuse to put on future coursing events and publicly declared so after a number of these attacks. I think they had enough of it. So it had some effect. It sort of highlighted the issue. I think the activists were at a bit of a loss as to how to best approach this, and maybe throwing tax and glass wasn't the best thing, but it was what was done, and it's what's in the history books. Another thing, there was a guy, particularly a guy called John Fitzgerald, I think his name was. He was involved in the Anti-Blood Sport Society or some group like this. He was accused of sending this note here that we see bits of, saying we're going to petrol bomb your house the same as we did at Ballyragged and all these different places. And he was accused of sending these letters to dozens of farmers around the Cork area, pressuring them to withdraw from coursing. Some did, and the police raided his house and claimed to have found a load of similar letters that were ready to be posted out. He claims that the police planted these letters in his property, and eventually it was thrown out of court. But it was the first accusation of police corruption in this, and in dealing with animal rights activists, or police collusion and so on.
Yeah, do you think that's a little bit like Alan Newbury Street? I mean, like there was that thing where he planted a nail bomb on his own Land Rover.
Yes, that's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah. To bring a lot of negative attention to the cause, if you like. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. There was the Master McGrath on the left here. We see these locals that are clearing up the Master McGrath statue, which is a statue to a famous coursing hound from the late 19th century, I think. And there's a statue to him. It's a pro-coursing statue. It's been attacked by the ALF on a number of occasions, and then subsequently cleaned by locals. The ALF have poured tar and paint over it and smashed it up on a few occasions. In the middle here, we see I think it was the Dungannon. It's a really bad photograph from a newspaper, but it shows the burnt-out remains of a coursing stadium in the north of Ireland that the ALF set fire to. And then there's more anti-blood sports protesters here trying to get through. Again, this is up in the north of Ireland, had the most prolific activists really throughout this period. Up top here, we see this Catholic Animal Welfare Society protesting with the Irish Council Against Blood Sports outside Clonmel police station, accusing the Clonmel police of colluding with local blood sports enthusiasts to put pressure on the likes of this guy down here, who was arrested on a number of occasions. He's he was the head of the Irish Council Against Blood Sports. His name is Pat Phelan, and clearly not an ALF activist, but he kept on being arrested and held for questioning for like 24-hour periods and stuff over recent ALF attacks during the 90s, the 1980s and 90s. Despite always condemning anything ALF in the area, the police had no one else to go on. I think there wasn't really any movement here as such in Ireland at that time to spy on the way there was in the UK. So they were grasping at straws, and they kept on arresting Pat Phelan and the secretary of the ICABS and accusing them of doing all these things.
Something to do. Going back to the statue, is that still there?
As far as I know, it's still there. Yeah. It's outside Waterford, I think. Waterford or Wexford. Some small town. It's the Master McGrath statue. It's quite famous.
Right.
Yeah. I'd never heard about it before until I'd again.
I'll have a look on Google Maps.
Next time you're passing through. Yeah. And then we go on to, of course, the mighty Hun saboteurs. That's me on the far right here. I'm actually blowing my nose as I'm just about to help my fellow saboteur Alan here, who's being dragged off private land at a Hunsab with the Vale of Aylesbury, which I think Ronnie leaves to sabotage way back in the day. So let's go into the Hunt saboteurs.
But that's a terrible narrative, Mark. You could say that you were calling the hounds off or something like that.
I know. I was being really honest here. You can see I've got a handkerchief against my nose and everything. Yeah, I could say that actually. In fact, I will say that in future. I'm shouting at someone. Now, the very first recorded Hunt sabotage didn't happen in the United Kingdom. It happened in a small village outside Limerick called Brewery. And it was organized by this guy up here who was a priest called Father Eugene Sheehy, who was organizing a campaign against the guy below him, the local landlord of the area, a guy called John Gubbins, who was a keen fox hunter as well. And John Gubbins had threatened to evict a number of families from his land. So Father Sheehy organized a sort of a boycott against Gubbins. So anytime that Gubbins and his crew tried to go out fox hunting during the season, I think it was of 1883, this was, Father Sheehy would gather up the local lads who were part of the GAA hurling team, and they would blockade the path of the fox hunters, and the fox hunters would just turn back. So it would have looked something like on the bottom right here, a whole lot of guys all wearing their GAA sweaters, carrying their Hurleys, which are also weapons in sort of wrong hands.
You wouldn't want to get in the way of them.
You wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of a Hurley. And they would blockade. So for the entire hunting season of 1883 or 1888 or whatever it was, these guys were stopped from going out. This is the first recorded evidence of hunt sabotage. It wasn't done in the name of animal rights. It was done in the name of tenants' rights, and it was part of the Land League sort of campaign. But they were so effective that by the end of the season, Gubbins sold his horse and the fox hunt disbanded. So the very first recorded fox hunt, and it was immediately successful. And as an aside, Eamon de Valera, the godfather of Irish republicanism, apparently is the bastard offspring of John Gubbins. Eamon de Valera's mum used to work as a servant in Gubbins' house before emigrating to America and giving birth to de Valera. And there is a rumor, I don't know how much weight to put on this, but there is a rumor that I found online that John Gubbins, the very first victim of the hunt saboteurs, was the father of Eamon de Valera, one of the principal figures of
that's it, folks. You tune into the Vegan Time Tunnel for all the latest gossip.
So there you go. I mean, it's wheels within wheels here. I couldn't get over the interconnections between all these histories, really. So whether it's
with the Native American headdress,
he was receiving an award from an American Indian tribe. I forget which one. I'm not too sure why they were honoring him, but they had him put on their headdress and did a powwow ceremony around him, and he gave a speech.
Like they were arresting him, doesn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, it was just this stunning photograph that I came across. I could have put up one of the more generic images of de Valera, but I came across this and I thought, this is
that's going in.
Yeah. So, but the very start of the modern day hunt sabotage movement began with Gwen Barter, who I describe as the Rosa Parks of the animal rights movement. Rosa Parks obviously being the woman who refused to give up her seat on the bus in Montgomery down in Alabama way back in the 1950s or 60s or whenever it was, sparking the bus boycott and the civil rights movement of that era that was led by Martin Luther King. So that began with Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat. The hunt sabotage movement began when Gwen Barter sat on the bonnet of the lead vehicle of this group of staghounds hunters here and refused to move, and they just turned around and went home.
And she did it again about that nowadays, would you, Mark?
They would keep driving these days.
Would, yeah.
Or from any point shortly after this time on, they didn't know what to do. Here's a middle-aged lady sitting on the bonnet. There's media around, and they just didn't know what to do, really. So they turned around, went home. She did the same thing a few months later. So did the hunters. They just turned around and went home. And people were looking at this with keen interest, including these guys here. These guys up in the top here are the guys who started. John Prestige on the right here, blowing the horn. He was the guy. He witnessed the end of a stag hunt in a village in Devon, and it so disgusted him that he decided to start up what became the Hunt Saboteurs Association, to take on these bastards who feel privilege over the bodies of other animals to the point where they can have them torn in half, and they smear the blood of these victims onto the faces of their own kids. I mean, these guys are borderline psychopaths, I would say. So the Hunt Sabotage movement was galvanized in response to the outrageous behavior of these people.
Yeah, it's called blooding, isn't it, Mark? Because I remember going to a pony meet once in Essex, and for some there was one kid on a pony, and he was kind of doing weird things with his head, and we realized that he was showing us that he'd been blooded because he had streaks of blood, on his face.
Right. It's quite sick, yeah. Borderline child abuse, I would say. So the Hunt Saboteur movement began in reaction to this. And it quickly became more and more organized. Initially, tactics were haphazard. One of the preferred tactics was throwing chunks of meat to the hounds before the hunt started, to distract them and to fill them up, because they're often starved for a day or two before they go out hunting.
Not the best vegan tactic.
No, it isn't really, is it? And it quickly died out, and it was replaced with tactics like the gizmo, which is a taped recording of the hounds on cry. Here on the left, you see 3 Sherpa vans full of saboteurs following this one hunt supporter on his way to lead them to the meet. He's unknowingly doing their work for them by driving them to the meet.
Towing them.
Yeah.
Actually, I've never seen that picture of Ronnie before.
Yeah, I don't know where I came across it. It was some obscure publication, and I had to put it up. There he is. He looks in his early 20s, and beside him is Dave Wetton, another stalwart of the Hunt Saboteur movement from years back, running across the field, sabotaging the Oxfordshire Coursing Club. I guess they're running onto the coursing club field there and causing disruption that way. So yeah, it really sort of kicked off. It began in the 1960s, but it began to really kick off in the 70s, and then particularly the 80s. And up top here, you see saboteurs following a beagling pack who are on foot. So it's much easier to keep up with them, and they're in much closer proximity to you. You see on both pictures here, you're walking right beside them. So the potential for violence at these things, it's always there. You're going out and you're spoiling their day, and rightfully so. But as far as they're concerned, you're just screwing up their fun, and they can get annoyed and they can lash out. And these
are the guys who wore the green coats and not the red ones, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and you got the beige guys up here. They have the little uniforms and the little white tights. And of course, as I say, violence was never far away. And whilst the first few saboteurs were met with sort of a bemused bewilderment, really, and a withdrawal of the hunters, after they got over their surprise, the violence came pretty quickly. And of course, they always had their own private security firm, aka the police, who were there to do basically anything that they were told to do by the hunt. They were on call the same as the hounds were a lot of the times, and you would see these posh guys on horses directing the police to do this and do that, and the police often would, they would act as their little minions, and it was disgusting. On the very bottom left here, you see, I forget his name, but he's the master of foxhounds over in Waterford now, and there he is with a shotgun. He had pulled out a shotgun. This is during the 1970s. And shot a van that had saboteurs in it. He had shot the bonnet of a Sherpa van, as it still contained saboteurs. He was given a 3-month suspended sentence, and that was it. You can guarantee if a saboteur turned up with a shotgun and shot a hunter's vehicle, they would get more than 3 months suspended sentence.
Yeah, so the real problem in those days was that the magistrates were hunters, weren't they? So.
That's right. Yeah. So there was a real. A lot of the media hated the Hunt Saboteurs. The police were very hostile. The legal system, the courts and the magistrates were often connected with the hunt, as you say. And so they were really up against it. But they persevered.
Now, Mark, before you leap on, and sorry to keep interrupting you, but I think you've got 20 slides left, and we're up to 55 minutes. So, do you want to continue, or would you want to come back and do proper diligence with them? It's up to you, really.
If it's up to me, I wouldn't mind coming back to it, Roger, because there's quite a bit more to go, and I do talk on about this, and if so,
well, it's probably my fault for interrupting you too much. But
no,
are you talking about next week?
Yes, I am. I mean, I could do the same time.
Yeah.
I could do the same time next week, and if that's all right with you, I don't want to dominate your schedule with all of this.
No, dominate away. Don't worry about that.
Okay. In that case,
slide 56, and there's 75 altogether, isn't there?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So we should get through it with one more session, and it gets really. I mean, it's a very interesting and exciting and human story. So
this is where people can buy the actual book version of this.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's available now.
Most of these images are in the book. Is that right?
That's right. Plus more. So some of these are Pulitzer Prize winning images. A lot of budding young photojournalists would ask to come out with the Hunt Saboteurs, hoping to catch some sort of drama on a bit of black and white film, and they often did, and won prizes as a result. There are some amazing images in my book, in the Sabotage book by the Hunt Saboteurs Association. So there's lots more to come, and this is the beginning of the sort of real violent period during the late 80s, I suppose, when saboteurs were killed and so on.
There's Deb, one of our regulars. I really enjoy Mark explaining the slides in detail. So that's a vote for you to come back, and probably a warning for me to shut up next week, I would think. So but okay. So that's where you can go. And so the book is still. Is this pre-sales or is it?
That's right. It's pre-order. It'll be available. It's being actually published and launched on the 4th of December, which is World Wildlife Conservation Day, and it'll be available from Amazon, Waterstones, Barnes and Noble, all good bookshops, plus the publishers themselves, who are Earth Island Books, and you can order it now from them.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Mr. Grumpy. There's quite a lot of grumpy vegans, isn't there? Good stuff. Watching over my breakfast in New Zealand. No rainforest in my neighborhood.
Okay.
Oh, there you go. Some more planting to be done.
Yeah. Indeed.
Right then, people. Well, I mean, I found that pretty fascinating, and so we're about halfway through the actual direct action bit now, really, aren't we? And yeah. Okay.
There's lots more to say. Yeah.
Yeah. Okie dokie. Well, in that case, I'm going to thank you once again for your information, and certainly the archive picture are really incredible, so that's really good. And again, it's very important for people to know the history of their movement, which is obviously the rationale for this series, really. So you're doing sterling work in that sense, Mark. So I thank you very much for that, and I'll be welcoming you back next week then, yeah?
Okay, I look forward to it. See you then.
Okay, brilliant. And thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you next week.